Welcome to the NFL MVP Momentum Podcast. I'm Sam Holcroft, joined alongside Payton Thompson. Before we begin, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Momentum MVP, follow our Facebook page at MVP Momentum Podcast, and check us out on YouTube at MVP Momentum Podcast. All right, PT. So today we're going to play a game. It's called Do You Trust? Now, I feel like this is something that we'll do semi regularly on the podcast, not only on this football one, but also on our basketball one. So, how it's going to work, I'm going to ask you a question. Do you trust? Yada, yada, yada. You can pertain to team, player, or the league, or maybe even an organization. And you just give me your honest opinion if you trust or do not trust what I said. So, I'll ask you first question. Do you trust that the Eagles will have another year of playoff success?
You know, as far as this question pertains, I think you could take this two ways, but I think the correct way to look at this is kind of looking at it down the middle. I think it'd be really hard for the Eagles to have similar or even, particular success as far as, I don't think they're going to make it to the Super Bowl. I don't think they're going to win the NFC South as far as locking down that one seed. Um, but I do think that they're going to make it back to the playoffs, but I think it's going to be a lot more like Jalen Hurts' first season, where they kind of get figured out sooner rather than later. And I think in the regular season, especially, I think more teams are going to be able to get a read on what the offense is trying to do. I think it could be one of those cases where, I'm trying to think of an NFL comparison, but it's really like any rookie, that may have a decent rookie year, but the sophomore slump comes because teams figure them out. And obviously Jalen Hurts is going to be in his third year, so it's a little bit different, but I do think that teams are going to be able to have a better grasp on what they're trying to do. And it's going to be interesting to see how they implement DeAndre Swift in that offense as well. But I would expect the defense to have very similar success, but kind of like what I said before, it's really hard to duplicate that same kind of success year after year when teams figure you out and you're also getting older. They have a lot of older guys on that line, and of course they're going to have two new young studs on that line, or one I think for sure, in Jalen Carter and then Nakobe Dean in the linebacker room. So, and they're going to have who they drafted last year. I can't remember his name, but so yeah, they're going to be. I expect them to be really good defensively, but I think offensively they could have some hiccups, especially implementing DeAndre Swift. But I would expect Devontae Smith to get better and AJ Brown to be the same guy. But I just don't see them going further than maybe the first or second round of the playoffs. I think there's going to be another team that's up and coming. That's going to be the new Eagles. I think I'm not saying this indefinitely, but I think it could be a team like the Lions. Or you just never really know, a team that kind of comes out the depths and kind of shows you that they can be better than what people thought they could be. And you know it's just really hard to implement even the regular season success that the Eagles had going on that insane win streak. So yeah, I think they're going to regress a little bit, but I do have them still going to the playoffs, just not going past the second round into the NFC Championship.
Yeah, and I feel like the biggest thing that kind of made it so the Eagles' path to the Super Bowl was easy because they had the number one seed. They get to play the lowest seed that wins in the first round, and the Giants beat the Vikings. If the
Yeah,
Vikings would have won that game, the Eagles would have played the Cowboys. Now, you know, the first time that they played, Dak Prescott was hurt, and the second time that they played, Jalen Hurts was hurt. So the team that had their starting quarterback out lost the game. So this was the rubber match between the three, or sorry, between the two. And if they would have played the Cowboys, would they have won? I mean, they looked okay. I mean, not okay. I think they destroyed the Giants, but they looked okay when they played the Cowboys a second time. But would it have really been? It's just hard to tell what could have happened in that game. And then if Brock Purdy doesn't tear his UCL in that game, it's like it could have been a totally different story. So the Eagles, the cards stacked up the way that they needed it to. I don't think that it could be as fortunate 2 years in a row.
yeah, I think that's a really good point to make. And you kind of talk about the path that they took to get there, and it's obviously the path is always going to be different each year, but yeah, just kind of how the dominoes fell. It's really interesting that maybe if certain things had happened a different way, even throughout the regular season, if they lose a couple more games, you don't really know how that affects them in the future. But talking about kind of the path that teams have weaved out for themselves, let's talk about the Jaguars. Do you believe that the Jaguars will make it to the AFC Championship game?
All right. So, you know me. For the last almost 9 months, I want to say, maybe 8 months, I have been on this Jaguars train that they are the future up and coming team, not only in the AFC, but in the NFL. Last year, I said they are one good offseason away from winning the division. They overachieved and won the division. Not only won the division, won a playoff game. So now you're telling me that I expect them to go one game further than they got last year. And honestly, they overachieved last year. Winning the division and winning a playoff game this year is the expectation now. I don't trust that the Jaguars will make it to the AFC Championship game because here's the thing. I'll ask you this. If they make it, who's not making it? The Chiefs or the Bengals?
Yep, exactly.
One of those two teams is not going to make it. And then you can also throw in the Bills, who's probably the next best team. Uh, so that means
Mm-hmm.
two out of those four teams isn't going to make it. And then let me throw in the Jets. They
The
had
Jets.
Aaron Rodgers, right? The Chargers. That's two of those teams are going to have to not make it to the second round of the playoffs. And any of
Yeah.
those teams could realistically finagle their way with the right matchups and everything. And in the NFL, you only have to win one game to move to the next round. In every other sport, you got to win multiple games. You just got to win that one. So I do not trust that the Jaguars will make it to the AFC Championship game as much as I really want to. Now, I won't be surprised if they do, but I don't trust them to do it. Not this year. Next year, we could talk about that later. But
Yeah.
this year, I don't trust it.
Yeah, I think you kind of laid out the foundation of your thoughts really well with this. I mean, basically what it comes down to is just right now where the Jaguars are at compared to where the Jets are at, Bills, and Chiefs are at right now. I think you just got to understand that it's just not quite their time yet, and the competition is still super heavy with guys that are just a little bit older than Lawrence. And I think honestly, with coaches that are just slightly better than Doug Peterson, I don't know how much of a hot take that is, but there's some really good coaching and some really good quarterbacks and defenses in the AFC, and the AFC honestly got harder this offseason. So, to think that they would be able to knock one of those teams out where they're at right now, I think is kind of a really, really hard to grasp. So I definitely agree with you. And as far as maybe the next step they could take, maybe next year, I'm not sure exactly what it would take to make that next level. But I do think, and I don't think this would happen. I don't think it's realistic. But I think if they found some kind of way to sign DeAndre Hopkins, I think that would really change the landscape of how much that offense could put out. Because I think when we talk about the Jaguars, even right now, they have two or three really solid wide receiver twos, but they really don't have that alpha guy. And I think maybe one of these guys that they have right now could step up to be that guy, but I just don't think none of these guys are natural number ones. And I think every team that we've talked about, and obviously Kelsey's not a wide receiver, but I mean he's kind of a wide receiver. When you talk about these teams in the AFC with wide receiver rooms, Stephon Diggs as well as T Higgins and Jamar Chase, it's just there's just a lot of competition with other wide receiver rooms, and you kind of need that alpha guy. And Eagles got AJ Brown, who's their alpha guy, and every team I think kind of needs that guy if that's how you're going to run your offense, and that's how the Jaguars are going to approach this thing. So I think they need that kind of guy.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing for them, because like last year I said offseason away from winning the division, and the next thing is get those young guys experience. Like playoff experience is great. Like if they can lose in the divisional again, that would either mean A, they got the one seed, or they won at least one playoff game. Either way, that's a huge win for that team. Even if they were
Yeah.
the 1 seed and lost to the 7 seed in their first game, that season would be a win because they know what they can do. So I think that like getting as much experience as they can, and like it starts with that offense, but also getting that defense some more experience. That's going to be huge in the progression of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So my second question for you, PT. Now last week we talked about our top 10 quarterback rankings. You had Lamar at 5, I had him at 10. So I think it only makes sense that I bring up this question to you. Do you trust that Lamar Jackson will be worth his huge contract that he signed?
Yeah, so it's funny because I think I kind of set myself up for this question. And I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to approach it, but I'm going to kind of take it from both sides and then I'll kind of give you my thought process at the end. But it's kind of a sticky question to approach. But basically, where I'm going to start this question at is if they were to not re sign Lamar Jackson, what was the opposition? What was the thing that they were going to do instead? And I just don't think there was any great avenue for them to go here as far as that front. Because if you do let him go, you're pretty much signaling, I think, at that point that you're going to try to rebuild the team, right? Because the quarter kind of starts around the quarterback. I mean, obviously, depending on your philosophy, you can start your rebuild at certain points. But I think when you talk about the offense as a whole, that offense runs through Lamar Jackson, whether he's healthy or not, right? So I think if you don't have Lamar Jackson in that offense, it's instantly probably a bottom 10 offense. And you're not going to put, your chips in the defense when the offense is going to give you anything. It just, especially in the AFC. So I think, if they wanted to rebuild and go that route, maybe they could have, but it's just really hard to swallow when you have a guy like Lamar Jackson that when he's healthy, he could be that MVP kind of caliber guy. And so on the other side of it, as they ended up doing, they gave him his 185 guaranteed, highest paid contract in the NFL. It's going to be really interesting to see how they fill out this team going into the future. And one thing that I think is nice to bring up about the situation that on the flip side, if they were to trade Lamar Jackson, they would have had even more. But I think with Lamar Jackson signing him now, they still have all their picks, I believe. So they're going to be able to fill out the roster decently throughout the years. And you even saw last year in the draft, they got Zay Flowers, trying to help him out as well. And they signed Odell. And so, they're going to have to be the GM in the front office is going to have to be very nimble about how they fill out this team. But I'm going to say short term, I don't think there was many better options. However, I don't trust that long term he's going to be worth the contract, especially, man, if his injury bug keeps coming up and he's just never able to play in a lot of games and just not in the big games, then yeah, it's going to be a terrible contract. And honestly, it could be one of the worst contracts given in history if he doesn't end up ever staying healthy because you knew beforehand that he had injury problems. And you could have probably netted the most picks that I mean, I don't want to say the most picks that someone's gotten for a quarterback because I don't know. I don't know that record, but I think you could definitely have gotten, you know, 2, 3 first rounders and some other picks for him. So if he ends up not being worth the contract, it's really, I don't know if it's quite a fireable offense for the GM because it's like, what else were they supposed to do? However, it's just kind of it's just tough because you don't have that money to build the roster around him, and it's kind of like, well, what do you do now with this team that they have? So that's kind of my opinion on it.
Yeah, and you talked about the avenues that they could have taken other than re-signing him, but I mean they could have went with and just signed Tyler Huntley. In hindsight, at pick 22 instead of Zay Flowers, they could have went with Will Levis
Yeah,
if they didn't sign Lamar. Um, but like that would have meant that they would have probably traded him. So there's just so many things that they could have done, but like in the end, almost everything's a rebuild move, unless if you go with Tyler Huntley, just because he was in the system, still was able to get them to the playoffs. But it's also like now we're trusting this guy for a whole season, not just like a week to week basis, because we
right.
never really knew when Lamar was going to be coming back. But I liked your answer. In the long term, it's I I don't want to guarantee it because it's hard to guarantee things, but I don't think it's going to be worth it in the long term because in his career he's averaged 10.4 rushing attempts per game, and that is that's quite a lot in the NFL.
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, he does get a lot of yards. He's almost at 4,500 yards. That's almost 900 yards per season. If he didn't get injured these last 2 years, he would have had 1,000 yards in each of those, which would be 4 straight 1,000-yard rushing years, which is insane for a quarterback. But if he gets hit, like those hits are going to take a toll. I mean, Michael Vick, I think it was after 2020 or the 2021 season, he approached Lamar and was like, "Hey, just so you know, if you take these hits, you're going to be playing less years."
Yeah.
Like, because he's like, I could have played 3 more years if I didn't run as much as I did. And Michael Vick had a decently long career.
Yeah.
And just to think that he could have played 3 more years if he didn't run as much, like, you know, so he's really got to try to save himself. So I just don't know if long term it's going to help. Like short term, yeah, they can compete in the division, but is that you also got to look at their division. They got the Bengals who are younger and better. You got the Steelers who are younger and almost on the same level as the Ravens. So it's like you're going to be competing in a tough division, and you can't count out the Browns either. So it's going to be real tough for the Ravens and Lamar's success.
Yeah, 100%. And I think another guy that I think would be interesting, not as a one-to-one comparison, but just if you look at the career trajectory, Cam Newton is a bigger guy, right? And he was also, probably a run first kind of guy. And when you compare him to Lamar's size, he's a lot bigger than Lamar. And we saw even after he won that MVP, it was pretty much a decline from there. Now, how much of that was psychological and how much was that body and how much was that Cam Newton not being able to adjust his game to passing? Who knows? But at the end of the day, just a bigger guy like him not being able to play a lot of years too, I think is also something that is something that you could compare to this. So, but yeah, and I also liked how you mentioned that, yeah, Tyler Huntley could have been, their guy if they wanted to go that route. But ultimately, if you're gonna, let AFC defenses and offensive coordinators and whoever else scheme for Tyler Huntley, um, I just don't think it's a recipe for success. I mean, at best, you're probably asking yourself to be a mediocre team at around the 9 to 12 pick, and then at that point, it's just like, well, why didn't we just rebuild completely and get a higher pick, especially with a guy like Caleb Williams coming up? So I think that would be honestly probably a worse move than to just completely rebuild completely. Um, but speaking of the AFC, my second question for you is: do you trust the Chiefs to make it back to the Super Bowl?
So last year, we really thought that the Chiefs were going to take a step back. They traded away Tyreek Hill. They lost Honey Badger. They lost Sorensen. It was just not looking good for the Chiefs. I mean, they acquired Juju. They had Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid and Travis Kelce, and in the end, that's all they really needed. They had those other pieces that just did a job. Last year, looking back, out of us four, you, me, Sean, and Zeke, 2 of us had Kansas City winning the division, and that was Sean and I. He had them as the 1 seed. I had them as the 2 seed. I still thought that they were going to be really good. You and Zeke both had the Chargers winning the division, but you had the Chiefs as a 5 seed,
Yeah.
and Zeke had the Kansas City as a 6 seed.
Okay.
So, with that being said, I had expectations of the Chiefs to win the division. That was an unbiased opinion, but the teams that I also had as the wild card teams, I had the Raiders as a 5, Chargers as a 6, and Broncos as a 7. I had that entire division going. And honestly, Josh McDaniels messed it up for the Raiders, and Nathaniel Hackett messed it up for the Broncos. Both of those teams get new coaches, or I guess different systems. So, like,
Yeah.
they get a quarterback that fits the system in Vegas, and they get Sean Payton, who is a great coach.
Yeah.
So I expect this division to be probably the best division to watch again. It's hard to have the same take 2 times in a row. So I'm beating around the bush, though. I do trust the Chiefs to make it back to the Super Bowl. Last year, they showed that they could make it with in what we deemed inferior talent. You and I talked in the Super Bowl where if we made a list of the top 10 players playing in the Super Bowl, the Chiefs would have had 3, maybe 4, and the Eagles would have had 6 or 7.
Yeah.
And they ended up still winning. So the it just shows that when you have Pat Mahomes, best quarterback in the league, Travis Kelce, best tight end in the league, and you can debate Andy Reid is now the best coach in the league. That's all you need offensively, and defensively, you just need the right system. So I do trust that the Chiefs can make it back to the Super Bowl. It's going to be tough. I think it's going to be tougher because you know they made it to the Super Bowl twice in a row when they faced the 49ers and the Bucks. But other than that, I don't think we've had someone go back to back since the Patriots. Before that, with the Ravens, not the Ravens, the Eagles, and then the Falcons. So, like
Yeah.
6 years, other than that one other time. So, it's
Yeah.
tough to go back twice in a row. I mean, look at the Bengals last year.
Yeah. Yeah, you kind of stole my point, to be honest, right before you tossed it to me, because I was going to say that exact thing. I think when you look at the talent of this team, yes, they have the talent to make it back to the Super Bowl, and it's obviously really hard to not have them at least, in the AFC Championship and being able to make it there. But I think, when you just think about, the very few teams that have made it back to back, I think of the Patriots, like you said, the Seahawks made it back. Obviously, they lost the second one. And so it's possible. It's definitely possible. But would I put my trust in it? I don't think so, because I think it's just so hard to do that in the NFL. And I think, like you said before, the AFC is going to get tougher and that division is going to get tougher. Um, and so, yeah, I just think I believe I had the Bills coming out of the AFC in the in our rankings or in our predictions.
Last
Um,
year.
yeah, I believe I had the Bills coming out.
Yep.
And
We'll
so
see.
I don't know. I don't think I would have them this year, but I would say my money would definitely be on someone else coming out of the AFC. However, I would trust and I would put my money that the Chiefs would make it back to the AFC Championship at minimum. But I think whoever they meet there, they're going to lose too, because it's going to be their time to go to the Super Bowl.
Yeah. I that's tough to see, but here's the thing: is like the Chiefs had the recipe to win last year, and not much has changed. I don't expect this team to take a step back. So, and plus, I mean, when you got if the only thing that could stop this team from making it back to the Super Bowl, in my opinion, is injuries.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's just how I feel about the Chiefs. So the last question I will ask you, PT. So I'll give you some background context.
Okay.
So for the last, decade almost, there is about 5 to 7 new teams that make the playoffs every single year. Do you trust that there will be at least 6 new playoff teams that didn't make it last year to make it this year?
Wow, six. So three in each division, or I mean, in each conference,
Technically,
possibly, or maybe
it could be
four
a,
and
it could
two.
be a 4-2.
See, and I saw. It's interesting you bring this question up because I'm pretty sure I saw a statistic a couple years ago. It was a long time ago, so I can't remember the exact number or where I got it, but I think it was CBS. But it said that every year, I think it's 4 or 5 playoff teams change that weren't in before. And so I would have to say, do I trust it? No, not at all. I don't trust it at all. But would I be surprised? No, not really, because I think some teams that were, um, maybe a few pieces away are a lot closer than some people think now. I think teams like the Lions, teams like the Falcons, teams like the Saints, even that didn't make the playoffs last year that could have, I think could make that next step. With the pieces they got in the offseason. So even a team like the Broncos, I feel like could surprise some people. Obviously, like we just talked about in that division, it's going to be really hard, but I think that they could surprise some people and possibly be a wild card team. So yeah, I definitely think it's possible, but 6 teams, man, is a lot because you got to think, you got to pencil in certain teams that, you would think besides injuries are just going to make it, the Bills, the Chiefs, the Eagles. Who am I forgetting on the NFC side? I just think there's a couple of teams that you can pencil in. So I think to think that six teams are going to change, I think that's really tough to see. But I mean, it wouldn't surprise me, but I don't trust it.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting because yeah, like every year there's been minimum, I think 4 teams different every year. And now that there's 14 teams,
Yeah, is it
there's
four?
two there's yeah, there's 2 extra teams now for the last few seasons now. So it gets really, really interesting because like I mean, you brought up some teams, but teams that I think uh not necessarily shoe-ins, but I feel like have high chances of making the playoffs this year. I'm going to start with the Jets. They were a game away. If they would have just beaten the Dolphins, they would have been in. I think the Lions not only have the best opportunity to win their division, but they could also get a wild card spot. Whoever wins between the Panthers, Falcons, and Saints,
Yeah,
because like the division winner is going to get in. I
right.
don't think the Bucks are going to retain. Um, in the NFC, that's kind of about it. I don't expect the Packers to do anything like that. But so there's that in the AFC. I already said the Jets, Dolphins made it last year. I do expect. Now I haven't gone through every single game and kind of done my prediction. We'll do that in like August. But I
Hmm.
think the Steelers could make the playoffs. Kenny Pickett looked pretty good that second half of that season. So Steelers wouldn't be a bad team. So I think that's 4. Um, the South, I don't expect the Texans or like if anyone were to overcome the Jaguars, it's probably the Titans.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe.
but I don't see that. And then the West, like I don't think the Raiders can. I'm not expecting them to, but I mean I guess they could, or the
Crazier
Broncos,
things have
like you said.
happened, definitely.
Yeah,
Hmm.
so 6 is a hard ask. If it was 5, I'd probably say yes. But
Yeah,
six is tough. That's almost half of the teams. And like you
right.
said, you get a pencil in. Like we can pencil in the Chiefs are going to make it. We can pencil in the Bengals are going to make it. We could probably
Yep.
pencil in the Bills. Other than
Yeah,
that, that's probably it on the AFC. Like Jaguars, maybe. But the
possibly
NFC,
Jets. Yeah.
yeah, the NFC, it's really Eagles and Niners.
Hmm.
And then like
Yeah.
any other team can kind of finagle their way in.
I
So
mean, maybe Vikings if you think that they're going to have a similar season.
yeah, I mean
So
at least a wild card, you would think.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I yeah, I definitely think that over under if it was Vegas odds would be at 5. I think 5 would be a good over under number because I think 4 is almost guaranteed, but 6 is just maybe that one team that is stays the same or doesn't. But yeah, you briefly talked about them, but my last question is, and I don't know if this is kind of a team we don't really talk about that much, so this might be out of left field, but how much do you trust Kyle Shanahan to be able to get the 49ers to where they need to be? So at least NFC championship, possible Super Bowl winner. How much do you trust that?
So that is a tough question.
Hmm.
So he helped lead them as OC in Atlanta, correct? To go to the Super
Yeah.
Bowl.
Hmm.
And then within his second year, he took him to the Super Bowl with San Francisco.
Yeah.
So he has proven success at 2 different levels, and because that offense wasn't that one of the most highest scoring offenses in NFL history? I'm pretty sure it was a top 10.
The Falcons?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean it just proved that like he can lead great offenses, and this can be a great offense. Getting Christian McCaffrey was amazing. My question mark is the quarterback play. Like,
Mm.
I don't know. The more I think about it, the more I really think Brock Purdy is going to be the starter. But you traded so much to get Trey Lance. It's like
Yep.
in order for him not to start. And like, here's the thing: hindsight's 50-50. That trade is done. You got to do what's best now. Like, you're not paying Trey Lance big money, right? So
Right.
like, I mean, it's like it's a psychological thing, like ideology. It's like, oh, we gave up so much for him, we gotta play him. Or it's like, I don't know, this Brock kid's pretty good. So it's just if I'm Kyle Shanahan, I start Brock Purdy, and you got Christian McCaffrey, one of the best running backs in the league. Kittle, one of the best tight ends in the league. You got Debo, Ayuk. Like that offense is phenomenal. You got a great defense, which helps because Kyle Shanahan is definitely an offensive guy. So he made it work last year with having three different quarterbacks throughout the entire
Yeah.
season.
Yep.
And if he would have had Brock for the entire game against the Eagles, maybe, just maybe they could have gotten the job done. So I'm going to say the I do trust Kyle Shanahan to help lead the San Francisco 49ers to a Super Bowl and win it. Because that was the question, correct?
I was saying at minimum NFC championship.
Yeah, I think that he
Yeah.
can do it all. He can lead them to the championship, especially if he does pick his quarterback this year and is like, this is our guy, because like Brock Purdy as Mr. Irrelevant, great season, probably best Mr. Irrelevant season we have ever seen ever. You
Yeah.
know,
Hmm.
at any stage in their career. And Trey Lance, there's a lot of hype around him, so I think that he can do good as well. But I mean, here's the thing: if they only throw the ball 20 times a game, and half of those are to McCaffrey out of the backfield, I still think that they can do great. So I mean, and because like you can also have Debo, you line up under center and Debo's your power back. I mean, you got so many options to do.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, if anyone's going to make it work, it's Kyle Shanahan, especially with it. Like, here's the thing: if you put Brock Purdy in Kansas City's offense, I don't trust that they're going to go back to the Super Bowl. You know,
Hmm. Yeah.
just even though Andy Reid is a great coach, but Kyle Shanahan has proven like he can make any quarterback work. Like, when was the last time that Kyle Shanahan had a quarterback where you were like, ah, gosh, that was a horrible offense?
Probably Johnny Manziel, and that was probably a lot more Johnny Manziel than it was Kyle Shanahan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I do trust that Kyle Shanahan can get the job done.
Yeah. I would agree with you on most fronts. I would say, with the talent they have, I think we can easily say they're top three talent wise, offense and possibly defensively. But I think one thing that we didn't really talk about with them is just the injuries, man. And we kind of did with the quarterback position a bit too, with Brock Purdy's injury and then Trey Lance obviously being hurt as well. But when you talk about guys like C Mac and Debo Samuels and George Kittle that have kind of had these little injuries for a couple years now, they kind of just keep coming around. And even guys on the defensive side, that's kind of, I think, eventually what happened to them towards the end of the season, or even, towards the middle of the season where they acquired CMAC, as they just were so banged up in certain areas, it was really hard to have a full roster. And obviously, when you give Shanahan a full roster, he can make it work, right? So I think if he has the full roster, and I even think if he had a healthy Jimmy Garoppolo still, I would definitely put my chips on that. But I think the sophomore slump, if they start Brock Purdy, might be real. I think teams, like I said with who was it earlier today? I'm not sure, but I think it's going to be also one of those things where teams are going to figure him out after his first year. Like you said, he was Mr. Irrelevant. I think teams a lot of the time didn't really game plan for him. Maybe not as seriously as they should have because they just didn't really know who he was or what he was about. But if they want to go that route, then they can go that route. If they go Trey Lance, I think it's a little bit more of a risky play because you don't know exactly how he's going to play when he plays. But I think it's a more higher ceiling upside because, like you said, you did spend that draft capital on him to move up and get him, and it would really feel bad to trade him to a team that he could possibly be a reclamation project to for maybe a second or a fourth round pick. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do at quarterback. I think that's probably going to depend on their long term outcome as far as this season, and hopefully they stay healthy. But if they stay healthy and they're confident with their quarterback room, then I think they can work out. And I think Shanahan's a smart enough guy that he can make a quarterback work. But they're going to have to be healthy, and they're going to have to, probably be stronger mentally and physically than they were last year, both of them.
Yeah, and I just kind of this just popped into my head, and teams that would maybe want to trade for Trey Lance. I don't obviously this is something that would happen right away, but here's the thing: is if Brock Purdy comes out of training camp and Kyle Shanahan says we're going with Brock this year, if I'm Trey Lance, I'd probably request a trade
Yeah,
because at this point, because like you picked me at number 3, I finally get my opportunity last season. I get injured, and I don't get to come back and get my spot back. I mean, obviously he's going to fight for it. Him and Brock are going to duke it out for it. But yeah, a team that I could see, it's obviously not going to happen, especially with the season that he had last year. But the Vikings trading for Trey Lance and maybe even shipping Kirk Cousins over, and like then you have a conversation. It's like, well, we can maybe start Kirk Cousins and have that proven success right away, and Brock kind of like play that backup role one more year because then Kirk has just that last year of his contract, and then it's Brock's team officially. Like, is it? It might be just a little too soon to move on to Brock, but like I said earlier, if anyone's going to make it work, it's going to be Kyle Shanahan. So
yeah,
and that was just one trade that kind of came into my mind. Obviously, there's gonna have to be loads of draft picks because I mean, like it would be a good outlook for Minnesota past this year, but at the same time, like if you keep Kirk Cousins, like I feel like there's a significant drop between Kirk Cousins and Trey Lance's play at the moment, where like if the Vikings think that they're a Super Bowl contender and then they trade for Trey Lance, they're like, okay, now we're just trying to win the division, you know?
yeah,
It's like
yeah.
it just kind of shift in mentality.
Yeah, definitely. I think another team that you could possibly look out for, and I don't think this would be the type of trade that would go down before the season, but I think it would be a trade that could happen postseason. I think the Packers would be interested a little bit. I think with their coaching staff and how they like to run their team, I think it would be an interesting fit with Trey Lance. And I think I don't know about you, Sam. I'm not really the biggest believer in Jordan Love, and so he's either going to prove me very wrong or he's going to prove me right this season. But I even think if he has like an okay season, and let's say they miss the playoffs, or I don't know. I mean, if they make the playoffs, he would have had to have a great season, right? So let's say they barely miss the playoffs or they miss the playoffs completely. I really don't know what the long term goal is for them as far as at quarterback if he doesn't end up working out. Um, and so yeah, it's going to be an interesting year for them as well. So I think it's another team that could be interested in acquiring Trey Lance as long as it doesn't require a whole ton of draft picks, and of course they got the draft capital from the Jets that they could use for that type of package too. So I think that's another team to look out for.
Yep. Is there anything else you need to add or say?
Nope, I think that's good to go.
All right. Well, that was a good conversation. I enjoyed this game. I think this is something that we'll be doing semi frequently here on not only this channel, but also our basketball channel. But once again, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Momentum MVP. Follow our Facebook page at MVP Momentum Podcast. And check out our YouTube channel at MVP Momentum Podcast. I've been Sam Holcroft.
I've been Peyton Thompson.
Thanks for listening.